The power of proximity, why nonprofit leadership needs voices from the margins every day across America. Well meaning people sit in boardrooms making decisions about communities they've never lived in, facing challenges they've never experienced, solving problems they don't truly understand. And we wonder why, despite billions in funding, we keep missing the mark. I recently had the privilege of interviewing Precious Darudis Jones, a revolutionary force in the nonprofit sector whose work has transformed how we think about leadership and community impact. Precious doesn't just speak truth to power, she embodies it with the perfect blend of unflinching honesty and compassionate wisdom. Her decades of advocacy have opened doors for countless marginalized voices and challenged the very foundations of how we approach social change. What she shared wasn't just compelling, it was revolutionary. And today I'm bringing her wisdom to this stage because it's time we confront an outdated belief that's quietly sabotaging our collective impact. The dangerous myth that diversity in nonprofit leadership is optional. It's not just outdated, it's harmful, it's counterproductive, and it's costing us the very progress we claim to seek. When those at the top don't share lived experiences with those they aim to help, their solutions often miss the mark, or worse, reinforce the very inequities they're trying to dismantle. This isn't speculation, it's a pattern we've seen repeated across decades of well intentioned but disconnected leadership. As Precious so powerfully articulated, organizations lacking diverse leadership cannot fully understand or respond to the unique challenges faced by marginalized communities. The distance between decision makers and those they serve creates blind spots that no amount of research or good intentions can overcome. But here's the beautiful truth that emerged from our conversation: when leadership reflects the community it serves, magic happens. Programs become more relevant, resources flow more effectively, trust deepens, impact multiplies. Let me share three fundamental lessons from Precious that should reshape how we think about nonprofit leadership. First, representation doesn't just matter, it drives results. When leaders emerge from within impacted communities, their insight leads to more innovative solutions and lasting change. They see opportunities others miss and understand nuances others overlook. Second, inclusive leadership fuels performance. Diversity isn't just a buzzword or moral imperative, it enhances creativity, collaboration, and organizational success. The research is clear: diverse teams outperform homogeneous ones, especially when solving complex social problems. Third, challenging old systems is necessary and uncomfortable. Real equity requires discomfort. Organizations must confront bias and power imbalances head on if they want meaningful transformation. The status quo didn't happen by accident, and it won't change without intentional disruption. Let me bring these principles to life through three powerful stories that Precious shared. Imagine a foundation launching a bold new initiative, a participatory grant making program targeting nonprofits led by communities of color. Progressive on paper, revolutionary in intent. But within months, tensions erupted, historical trauma surfaced, trust issues emerged, conflicts arose that the funders weren't prepared for. Some foundations retreated to what felt safe, their traditional controlled processes, but others chose the harder path. They stayed present, they listened deeper, they engaged directly with grantees, not to manage the conflict, but to understand it. The results? Striking differences where foundations persisted with inclusive approaches, even when uncomfortable, They witnessed transformation, deeper engagement, more relevant funding, authentic partnerships. Where they abandoned the experiment, they merely reinforced the very power dynamics they claimed to want to disrupt. What makes this story so powerful is what lies beneath it. Decades of exclusion had left many community leaders deeply wary of philanthropic systems. This initiative wasn't just about money, it was attempting to heal wounds inflicted by generations of institutional neglect. The foundations that understood this, that committed to the messy and perfect process of building trust, ultimately created something revolutionary. True partnership between funders and grassroots organizations built on honest dialogue. The impact rippled outward, money flowed more effectively. Programs had deeper impact. Communities felt ownership rather than dependency. Most importantly, it demonstrated that centering marginalized voices builds sector wide resilience against injustice. In another organization, Precious highlighted, leadership recognized their homogeneity was limiting their impact. They implemented an inclusive leadership program specifically designed to empower women and people of color within their ranks. The initial resistance was fierce. Established leaders feared losing control. Unconscious bias created invisible barriers to advancement, but they persisted. They provided targeted education. They created mentorship programs pairing emerging leaders with executives committed to change. They made space for uncomfortable conversations about power and privilege. The transformation wasn't immediate, it never is, but it was profound. Representation increased at all management levels, team cohesion improved dramatically, innovation metrics soared. What's fascinating is the backstory. 4 years, homogeneous leadership had stifled growth until staff finally demanded real investment in diversity efforts. The program graduates didn't just take seats at existing tables, they built new ones. They spearheaded initiatives specifically tailored for underserved clients, expanding the organization's impact in ways previously unimagined. This wasn't just about changing who sat at the table, it was about changing what became possible because of who sat at the table. The third story, Precious, shared strikes at the heart of how we think about community engagement. A Black led nonprofit was struggling with their fundraising events. The traditional galas and formal dinners felt disconnected from their community. Attendance was dwindling, donor engagement was superficial. The events catered to wealthy outsiders while alienating the very people the organization served. Their solution, radical inclusion. They completely reimagined their approach, shifting planning committees to include local voices. They incorporated culturally relevant programming. They created events that celebrated community strengths rather than highlighting deficits. The results were extraordinary. Attendance tripled. Community members who had never engaged before became active participants. Donor relationships deepened beyond transactional giving. Both funds raised and awareness around key issues increased dramatically. After years of struggling for resources while being overlooked by mainstream philanthropy, this pivot marked a turning point. The organization's visibility soared, their financial stability strengthened. Most importantly, they redefined what successful fundraising looks like, creating models that other organizations across the region began to adopt. So, what happens if more organizations truly embrace this perspective? If nonprofits commit to representative leadership, solutions become better tailored and more sustainable for real world challenges facing marginalized groups. And trust between organizations and communities grows exponentially. Innovation flourishes as multiple perspectives drive problem solving. Ultimately, we'll see stronger movements capable of tackling systemic inequities, not just patching over them temporarily. We'll move from charity to justice, from helping to healing, from saviors to partners. But let's be honest about what stands in the way. As Precious would say, keeping it real is an act of love. The resistance to diverse leadership isn't just about explicit bias, though that certainly exists. It's about comfort, it's about power, it's about the false belief that expertise only looks one way. It's about networks that reproduce themselves. It's about fear of the unknown. And it's about the myth that diversity is somehow separate from excellence rather than essential to it. When we exclude voices from the margins, we don't just harm those individuals, we harm our collective ability to solve problems effectively. We miss insights that could transform our approach. We waste resources on solutions that don't stick. We perpetuate the very systems we claim to want to change. The nonprofit sector exists to address society's most pressing challenges. How can we possibly do that effectively if our leadership doesn't reflect the full spectrum of experiences, perspectives, and wisdom in our communities? As Precious so powerfully articulated, this isn't about tokenism or checking boxes. It's about proximity. It's about the irreplaceable value of lived experience. It's about recognizing that those closest to the pain should be closest to the power. I stand before you today not just to share these stories, but to issue a challenge. What if the most qualified person to lead change in your community doesn't look like traditional leadership? What if they don't have the degrees, the pedigree, the polish that we've been taught to value? What if the expertise you need most isn't found in boardrooms, but in the very communities you serve? The time for incremental change has passed. The communities we serve cannot wait another generation for us to get this right. They cannot afford our learning curve. Today, I challenge you to examine your own organization. Look at your board, look at your leadership team. Ask yourself, who is missing? Whose voice is not being heard? Whose experience could transform how we approach our mission? Then take action. Not tomorrow, not next quarter, not when it's convenient. Now, create pathways to leadership for those with lived experience. Redesign your hiring practices. Reimagine your board recruitment. Redistribute power in ways that might make you uncomfortable. Because that discomfort is the growing pain of real change. Remember, the most powerful expertise in addressing community challenges doesn't come from studying problems. It comes from living through them and emerging with wisdom that no textbook can teach. The future of effective nonprofit work doesn't belong to those with the most credentials or the biggest budgets. It belongs to those with the courage to share power, center marginalized voices, and build leadership that truly reflects the communities they serve. The question isn't whether we can afford to diversify nonprofit leadership. The question is, how can we possibly afford not to? The world is waiting for your answer.